Hello and welcome. Welcome to a Lunch and Learn session hosted by the Ontario Network of CAPC and CPNP projects. You've joined us today. It is Friday, October 4th, and we are really delighted to host this session for you on the topic of FASD prevention and the Condom Project. Our presenter today is Mary Mueller, and I will hand things over to her in a moment. She will introduce herself. But first, I will ask if you have just joined us to make sure that you were on mute so that we can have a clean recording for our archives. So my name is Sydney Bell, and I'm the program lead for the Ontario Network of CAPC and CPNP projects. And just really delighted to be here and in conversation with Mary Mueller once again. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to pause and offer a land acknowledgement. And so the Ontario Network of CAPC and CPNP projects acknowledges and thanks the First Peoples of the territories where we work and serve, and other Indigenous people for sharing this land in order for us to come together today. And now, with that, I'd like to introduce Mary Mueller. So Mary, can I hand things over to you?
Sure. Welcome, everyone. It's great to see people from across the country, and I think by working together, we just make things better. So I just encourage all of you to keep doing the great work I know you do in CAPC and CPN programs. I worked in a CPNP program and the sister CAPC program for, I don't know if it was 15 or 20 years, but it was some of the most rewarding work I've ever done. And the most, I felt very honored to do that work. I found you learned as much from the participants coming as I knew myself. And I just found that the more I worked with women and tried different things with respect to substance use and helping them, the better it got. So I encourage you to try different things, make mistakes, and change and find out what works better, because you'll only get more wonderful as time goes on. So it's my pleasure today to be representing the FASD1 Prevention Action Group. And FASD1 is called Fetal Alcohol Spectrum Disorder Ontario Network of Expertise. And we have developed this project with funding from Public Health Agency of Canada, very kind of them. And we developed it with the specific thought for CAPC CPN programs. We wanted to give them something that they could tangibly use. So use our funds for things that you need, but also we wanted to create a resource that you could use with your staff and your program. So I'm hoping after Sydney posts this, you'll get the PDF of the slides and you'll get the recording, that you will go over this presentation with each and every one of your staff, so that they are aware of it as well. And that's kind of what we hope to do. The condoms will not last forever, but I know many of you can get condoms from other places. The posters and the Tearoffs will last longer. And so we're hope that you can use this as a vehicle of talking about FASD prevention. So it kind of took on the name Condom Project. We didn't mean it to, but that's what it's taken on, and it's kind of catchy. So it could be the birth control pill project. It could be many things. So we just use the condom as a vehicle of discussion for you.
Right.
And I am not, just a second. If I'm going now. Yes. So some of the objectives for today is, and some of you may have heard this, although we've updated the slides, to review best practices to prevent FASD, and more importantly, to explore what your role in your program might be to prevent FASD, to introduce the importance of discussing birth control for the prevention of FASD, and to introduce condoms as a way to get the message across to clients. Who is FASD1? We are a volunteer collaborative of parents and caregivers practitioners, and service providers. And our goals are, one, and that's what we're talking about today, to prevent FASD, but we also have groups looking at better outcomes for individuals living with a disability by advancing the development and dissemination of best practices. There's 5 working groups. There's a diagnostic group, an educational work group, an intervention and support group. I'm on the prevention group and have always been. And there is also a justice group. The justice group isn't as active because they did such great work. They are doing some other work with some folks, but you're more than welcome to join us at any time. And here's how to join our group if you'd like to. Our group, the prevention group, meets about 6 times a year. And if we're working on projects such as this one, we break off into small working groups. And I find, again, I learn a lot just by working with other people across the province. So I'm based in Ontario, and FASD1 is an Ontario-based organization.
So these groups are open to anybody, Mary?
Absolutely. We love CAPC CPNP members to join us. And we also then, like, if I get news, I will often send out an email that way. So even if you're not meeting, it's a good way to keep a bit more up to date. So the definition of FASD has changed a little bit, and only because CAN-FASD, which is a national organization, is trying to help us have a standard definition. And so this has changed a little bit, but it still means the same thing. It's a lifelong disability, so you don't recover from it, that affects the brain and the body of people who have been exposed to alcohol in utero or in the womb, whatever you want to call it. Each person with FASD has strengths and challenges, but they will need supports to help them be successful in many different parts of their lives. So part of this definition change is to emphasize the strengths. We didn't always emphasize the body part, but more and more research is realizing that there are significant other organs that are affected, but the main one that affects their functioning in life is the brain damage that occurs. And a lot of people don't realize how costly FASD is. We used to have a 1% incidence rate. Recent studies have found it's 3 to 4% of the Canadian population, which then costs us a lot more money. If we're looking at stats, Public Health Agency of Canada says $5.3 billion from birth to 53. But a researcher at CAN-FASD, they estimate $9.7 billion. The 5.3 has been around for quite some time, so I suspect it's not as accurate because it's been there for a long time, and we know that there's more people being diagnosed and so on. So, but it's really hard to determine the numbers at times. The estimate is $1 to $2 million per individual to support them throughout their life. That's a lot of money. And the rate of FASD in Canada's prisons is estimated to range from about 10 to 23%. And people with FASD are 19 times more likely to be incarcerated. So that's where a lot of the costs come. And of course, we want to avoid incarceration if we can. 90% of those with FASD have a mental illness, which may be caused by FASD or exposure to alcohol prenatally, but it also may just be a function of they think differently, but they don't look any different, and so people judge them and assume different things about them, and that can cause anxiety, depression, all kinds of things like that. So CAN-FASD estimates that Canada would benefit greatly if we were to devote resources to the prevention of FASD, and that's where we come to CAPC CPNP staff, because you can play a huge role in that, at least in harm reduction. If we spend $150,000 to prevent FASD, we would save $1.6 million.
Wow, that's a big return.
So we keep making a case that prevention is a good return on investment. It's a huge return. We just have to devote more money to that. But I'll keep talking about that.
Cool.
So why would we focus on women and alcohol? So we don't want people just to focus on pregnancy. We want people to focus on all women of childbearing age and any of their supports. Well, the reason for that is in Ontario, our past year alcohol consumption for women was 76.8%. So we know that's a large percentage of women. They may be having one drink a year, or they may be drinking every day. Just in the last year, 76.8 had some alcohol. 11.9% of them reported exceeding the low-risk alcohol drinking guidelines, and we'll talk a little bit more about those later on, but it's basically for women, no more than 2 drinks per day or 10 drinks per week. So 12% exceeded those. Daily drinking rates for women have increased from 2.6 in 2001, and we steadily go up to 6.8 in 2017. So we know women are drinking more and more regularly. Hazardous and harmful drinking for women increased from 4.8 in 1998 to 9% in 2017, and that's based on a screen called an audit. Binge drinking rates for young women have increased in the last decade, but we have seen a slight decline, so we're hoping it's not just a blip, a little blip, but we need to keep working and letting women know about the caution around drinking alcohol, and certainly around drinking alcohol in pregnancy. Most indicators increase as women's education increases. And again, this is, I think most of CAPC CPNP staff know that it's not just women who are struggling with the social determinants of health. It's educated women who also have some income. So really, we need to look at all women here. It's not just a pocket of the population. And so this is why we want to focus on women and alcohol. Whether they're pregnant or not, alcohol affects women differently than men, and less alcohol can have the same effect as more alcohol for men. And if women drink at the same rate as men, they're going to have more health effects. If women consume alcohol above the low-risk alcohol drinking guidelines, it's chronic disease that we're worried about, but also increases the risk of violence and injuries as well, which may also be the case with men, but for women tend to be more a victim of violence than men. Risky use of substances before pregnancy will put a woman at higher risk of alcohol use in pregnancy. So that's why we don't just focus on pregnancy. And FASD, as we know, is caused by alcohol use in pregnancy. So what factors would determine the impact of prenatal alcohol exposure on the little baby developing in utero? Well, impact of alcohol can depend on when the alcohol is consumed. So you can see from this diagram that the brain continues, and the central nervous system continues to develop throughout the pregnancy, whereas other organs will develop at different times in pregnancy. And that's why the brain is so much affected. It would depend on also how often the woman consumed alcohol. Did she have it every day, or did she just have it one drink once per month? It will impact the effect on the baby. But one of the bigger ones is how much is consumed. So we know that binge drinking, so drinking, more than 3 drinks at a time, there's different definitions about that, but that is can have a larger effect than just 1 drink at a time. So we're really worried about binge drinking, and we know binge drinking is increasing for women. So we need to pay attention to that and talk to women about it. It may also depend on age. So as people get older, their liver doesn't function as well, so they're not breaking down the alcohol as well, and then the baby would be exposed to more alcohol. If the woman eats well, that can compensate for some things. That's one of the things in the literature. If a woman is in a situation where she's struggling with social determinants of health, that's very stressful, no housing, maybe not as much social support, income may be limited, that can affect the impact of alcohol in utero. And we also know that genetic factors can as well, but we don't have a test to screen for those at this point.
Right. So
what do national and local statistics show? Well, we will still say 50% of pregnancies are not planned. The SOGC, they haven't published yet, but I think they're looking at closer to 60%. So we need to be kind of watching for that literature. Women who are at highest risk of binge drinking are 15 to 19 years old, followed closely by 20 to 24 years of age, prime childbearing ages.
Mm-hmm.
Highest rates of unplanned pregnancies are in the 15 to 19-year-old. I don't think that will be any surprise to anyone on the call today. But 82% of pregnancies in this age group are not planned. So that's very high. This is the most recent study we have on this, but 2009, the Maternity Experiences Survey found 62.4% of women drank 3 months before their pregnancy. Most women don't stop drinking until they know they're pregnant, so you could have some alcohol exposure at that time before the pregnancy is confirmed.
Right.
But 10.4% report drinking in pregnancy. So that's pretty significant when we're looking at the damage that can be done and the amount of cost that it would have to our system, to say nothing of how it affects that person as they grow. So what we're trying to make the case for is waiting to prevent FASD in pregnancy is just too late. So we have to start before pregnancy, and it can be even in CPNP programs right after the woman had her baby. So that's before pregnancy as well.
Mary, do you suspect that the 10.4%, that's a reported number? Do you suspect there might be that number's higher?
Oh, yes. It's a very, it's very difficult for women to report they drank alcohol in pregnancy, right? And we would assume it would be higher, but we can only go with the stat. And we also assume that if a woman is using other substances, that she normally is consuming some alcohol as well. And again, I don't think it's any surprise to anyone on the call today that multi-substance use is very common. So.
Thank you.
So Canada's low-risk alcohol drinking guidelines, as I said, so for women, because they metabolize differently, they have more fat, less water, they have less enzyme to kind of break down the alcohol, the recommendation is less than for men. So women are no more than 2 per day or 10 per week. Men, it's 3 per day, 10 per week. The recommendation that there be some non-drinking days every week. So if somebody's drinking every day, we're worried that they're developing a dependence or a habit. And the low-risk alcohol drinking guidelines allow for special occasions. For women, it's no more than 3 drinks at a time. And then there's a note that if you're pregnant, 0 is safest. And I wish they would change this. If you're pregnant or planning to become pregnant, and I would put in, or think you are pregnant or could be pregnant or about to breastfeed, the safest choice is to drink no alcohol at all. Because as I say, many women will wait until their pregnancy is confirmed. So we need to get the message out that if you think you could be pregnant, stop drinking until you know. So it sounds simple, just tell women not to drink in pregnancy, but it's not simple. 2/3 with alcohol use issues also have mental health problems, so they're probably using the alcohol to self-medicate. Many women who use alcohol also experience physical or sexual abuse, so we have to think about abuse and alcohol and mental health kind of all as a package. And it's not as easy as just telling women don't use alcohol in pregnancy. That may work with women who are light users. It's probably not going to be that helpful for women who are using more heavily. And we need to form a relationship with them and then get their trust and then work with them that way. Assess and provide treatment and support for alcohol use and the mental health and the abuse, and also help them address some of the social determinants of health if that's an issue for them. And again, advising women to stop alcohol use may be helpful for light users, but maybe not women who are using alcohol to cope with their stressful lives. So what are some of the risk factors, so you kind of know who in your program you might be wanting to pay a little bit more attention to, but we want you to talk to all women, is women who drank above the low-risk alcohol drinking guidelines before pregnancy, women who are not using birth control reliably, because if 50% of pregnancies are not planned and they're drinking, we know that their potentially baby could be exposed to alcohol. women in their 30s who work and they've maybe waited to have a family until their career was established and they drink socially, we know they're at risk as well. Many women will continue to drink until their pregnancy is confirmed because they don't want people to know they're pregnant. And then, of course, women struggling with the social determinants of health, it's the stress around that. And FASD does not discriminate. It can affect anybody from any socioeconomic background, religion. I always make a point of talking to women who maybe are a Muslim as well. They may or may not be drinking. They certainly may not share with you, so we need to give the same messages to those women as well. Even though the percentage of women in that culture are far less likely to drink, we still need to make sure they're aware. And culture, race, or age does not discriminate. If a woman has a partner who drinks or has an addiction, they're more likely to drink or use other substances as well. If a mom has a cognitive impairment, and that may not be diagnosed, you can just tell they don't process things the same, perhaps they don't remember things the same, I would be thinking she maybe has FASD or a neurodevelopmental issue and change the way I talk to her and work with her. But they're at higher risk for FASD as well. Women who use other substances are more at risk for alcohol use in pregnancy, and women who have had a previous child who was exposed to alcohol in pregnancy, especially if that child appears to have no issues. And they may or may not have issues, but then the woman thinks, well, I drank some in my pregnancy before and everything was okay, so they're more at risk for second and third pregnancy alcohol use. So what's the Condom Project? It's basically an FASD prevention kit that targets both men and women. We just developed it as an opportunity to start the conversation and bring attention to the prevention of FASD. We have the kits, we're just not exactly sure how we're going to get them out to projects, and if anybody has any ideas, I'd appreciate the ideas. So they're for CAPC and CPNP programs, and in the kit will be a poster, and I'll show you what that looks like. Condoms, I'm sorry, not as many as we would like to order, but budget restrictions, but as I say, you can use other condoms in it, and please do. And then there's some tear-off information sheets that you can give to women if you choose. If you don't think women or men are going to read them, then don't bother. Just have your posters and have a chat. So this is what the poster looks like. We have it in French and we have it in English, and they're double-sided, so you can put up whatever you want. These are the messages, basically. But the key message is, if you drink alcohol, basically make plans to prevent pregnancy. Don't just wait until pregnancy happens. And as I say, the condom is just to draw people in. You could be talking to them about Depo-Provera. You could talk to them about condoms, the birth control pill, whatever other birth control options they might be considering. Condoms just a way for you to bring up the conversation. And then these are the tear-offs. I'm sorry they're a little blurry, but they're basically the same information as on the poster, only there's a little bit more. And you can tear it off and give it to the women and they can look at it later. So basically, what's the message? If a woman's pregnant or planning a pregnancy, there's no safe time, safe amount, or safe kind of alcohol. Drinking alcohol during pregnancy can cause FASD. This is the definition that came from CAN-FASD. I find it a little high literacy, but again, we're trying to use it, so we put it in here. Make plans to prevent FASD. Use birth control that both partners can agree on every time. Talk to your healthcare provider about birth control options. Talk to them about the low-risk alcohol drinking guidelines and your alcohol use. And again, some people may be more likely to go to a website. That's a great website. They can self-assess. Drinking alcohol can affect your ability to make safe decisions, and that's an important message as well. And then we wanted the consent message in there, so to address that for women as well. So how do we want you to get the message out? We hope that you're using it in your programs or any other program you happen to be involved in with women of childbearing age and men. Take the poster and the Tearoff wherever you can. If they prove to be really helpful for people, we can look at, in a next budget year, maybe printing some more. So we just want you to get the message out that there's no safe time, safe amount, safe kind of alcohol. More than half of pregnancies are not planned, which is why we need to start before pregnancy, and use birth control that's appropriate for both partners every time to prevent pregnancy. And then if you drink alcohol, make plans to prevent pregnancy before it happens. So pretty simple message, but the research has shown that it can really make a difference. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about the research behind why we're doing this. And this is the 4 levels of prevention that has been around for over 10 years now. It's used actually internationally now. It was originally done by Public Health Agency of Canada, and then it was adopted by FASD. And how it was adopted is the supportive alcohol policy was not part of it originally, but now it is, and it is very important. And I'm sure people in Ontario are a little bit more aware of that because some of our alcohol policies have changed, which may have an impact of increasing alcohol use in women, and that's a concern. So there's 4 levels, and we'll go through each of them, but this is basically what the model looks like with supportive alcohol policy in the middle. So for the first level, and we did this for years, is basically just raising awareness, and we do still need to do this and getting accurate messages out there. It's an important component. It can change alcohol consumption patterns, but on its own, it's probably not very effective. So if we only did awareness campaigns, not having conversations with women, not providing support, not providing support after they have their babies, it's probably not going to be that effective. So it needs to work in conjunction with the other 3 levels of prevention and supportive alcohol policy. What would be your role in your program in this? Well, basically support local efforts. You could talk about it with your program members in September, but we also need the messages throughout the year. You could help to increase the knowledge with your colleagues and your agency staff. Again, I hope you take this PowerPoint and you use it with staff and just share the messages, because even staff have myths around alcohol use in pregnancy. And help to challenge it in a nice way, present the evidence and dispel some of the myths. Post stuff on your website, Facebook page, Twitter, I don't know if you're using Snapchat or whatever, Instagram, whatever you're using, get the messages out there on a regular basis. And level 2, this is where this project focus is a discussion of alcohol and its risks with all women and their support networks. And that's basically the vehicle of this Condom Project. And this is where actually we think the most work can be done in prevention, again, with conjunction of the other 3 levels of prevention. But it's one of the most effective strategies to reduce alcohol-exposed pregnancies. And we do know that health and social service providers, such as staff in CAPC CPNP programs, are really a credible source of information. And we know from research that your advice can lead to some behavior change. Sometimes it doesn't feel like that when you're working in a program, but we know from the research it is the key, and it can help shift the lens of reproductive health from pregnancy to before pregnancy. So it's a really good way to think about it. We just need to change the way people are thinking. They only think pregnancy. 43% of women and 32% of women planning a pregnancy in the next 2 years did not recall receiving any information about alcohol and pregnancy from their doctor. That's pretty significant. And I think this is where local programs and communities such as CAPC CPNP can make a huge difference. So what's your role? Make sure you discuss alcohol use and the risks of alcohol use for women themselves, but also in pregnancy with all women of childbearing age and who's ever supporting them, so that they're getting consistent messages from their support networks as well. The other piece is really to have a safe conversation, non-judgmental, respectful, about alcohol with all women and men of childbearing age. Just provide the key messages regarding safer alcohol use, and make sure you're asking, if you're using alcohol, are you on a form of birth control that's going to prevent pregnancy? If they're struggling with alcohol use and they share that with you, then try and be aware of the services that are in your community and help them link to that. It's hard to link to a service on substance use. And so sometimes what I found is help them make that phone call, help them get to that first meeting. And sometimes that's all that was needed. But without that step, I don't think many women would get there. So this is a great document to start the conversation. It's a fairly recent research. It's done by the BC Centre of Excellence, and they do some wonderful work. And before this, we would always encourage workers to screen women for alcohol use. And you can still do that. I'm not saying don't, but for me personally, I found just having the conversation worked much more naturally than screening women. And so that's sort of what this document is helping with, is how do you start that conversation and have it naturally so that women feel comfortable. So there's multiple practice approaches that can be used for brief intervention and support. Successful brief interventions that are working with women, collaborative, non-judgmental, and recognizing women that they're their own expert on their lives. So if they said, well, I can't stop using alcohol, but I might be able to reduce it, she's telling you something, and work with her to help reduce that and come up with some strategies and check in again and see how things are going, and be sure to provide positive reinforcement. It's that relationship with the women that's going to make actually a bigger difference. Brief intervention and support with Indigenous girls and women and other cultures needs to be culturally grounded and being aware of their culture. And I know that people in CAPC CPNP programs have that hands down. Conversations may be formal or informal, structured, unstructured, short, long, one time, a series, whatever you find works for you, but try and have the conversations. I know when I first started having them, I wasn't very good at them, but the more I did it, the more I discovered what works with women and what helps them to feel more comfortable. And as I say, research has shown that service providers are often reluctant to ask women. So I just encourage you to try something and learn from it. And they're worried about jeopardizing their relationship. So, you know, bringing it up, I talk about this with all women, and this is why, and, you know, how does alcohol fit in your life? Just an open-ended question that makes women not feel like they're going to be judged. And regular conversations, I think, are important. And I think you need to be aware of issues of consent, make sure they're aware, confidentiality, privacy, comfort during interventions. You wouldn't do it in the middle of a hallway with everyone around, things like that. Again, pretty common sense things, but when you bring them all together, it helps to make a good conversation with women. This is one question that I have used, actually came originally from Nancy Poole with the BC Centre of Excellence. And I just find it's non-judgmental. It just works beautiful. And I find if you ask that and a woman doesn't drink at all, she'll say, well, I don't drink at all. And then I'll just say, well, I just want you to be aware that, you know, we don't recommend any alcohol use in pregnancy because blah, 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 and go on. But if a woman then talks a little bit about alcohol use, you can go further. But I just find it's a great question. What strategies will reduce alcohol use? Well, as we say, start before pregnancy, have brief conversations, or screen all women for substance and alcohol use. Be aware of the current research regarding substances use, and it keeps changing, so I need to keep updating the slides. Provide the key messages to all women on Canada's low-risk alcohol drinking guidelines. Have a look at the Rethink Your Drinking site. Emphasize that the low-risk alcohol drinking guidelines, this is important, are upper limits. So if they don't drink that's even better. We need to give that message. We don't want to normalize drinking. Use birth control if you're drinking any alcohol, and that message hasn't always been with alcohol use. And we would recommend a multivitamin for all women of childbearing age, mainly for the folic acid, but for iron as well. And what strategies will reduce? Well, you can use a screening tool, or you can just have a safe, comfortable conversation. You can assess if they're following the low-risk alcohol drinking guidelines, which is pretty simple to do. You can use screening tools such as CAGE, TACE, the CAGE itself, Tweak, Audit, whatever you feel comfortable with and works for you. If it's working, keep using it. If there's things that you'd like to change, try a few new things and see what works for you. If they're using alcohol and substances, it's important to assess how often, how much, reason for use, self-perception of use. So they might be having 5 drinks a day and I don't think it's a problem. So you need to sort of get an idea of their self-perception. And after they leave, it might be important to document that. But I encourage you not to document in front of them. That would make me feel a little bit judged, and it would make me want to have a conversation with you again. So there's lots of supports that are available, and I'll go into some of them at the end. We used to have them throughout, and we found it better to more organized to have them at the end. But I encourage you to look for local and provincial and national services, such as most areas have some sort of addiction service. A food security or food insecurity programs, if you're worried about not having enough food on your table, alcohol is not your primary worry. And peer-to-peer programs work really well. Informal supports, if they're worried about housing, women's shelters for housing or other housing supports. Housing is a huge issue in many areas across the province. You can refer them to telehealth. You can refer to mental health counseling and many, many more services. I encourage you to network with whatever programs are in your area and develop partnerships. I know in Waterloo Region, we had one of our addiction programs for pregnant women come once a month. The reason why we did that was they weren't going to those programs, so we tried to increase the trust between, and I think it did help. Understand the referral process. So how do you refer them? Who's eligible? How do you do that? And you only learn that by making a phone call and finding out who's working in them. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you learn that by doing it with a woman, and that's okay. These are some fundamental components of talking to women, so things to keep in mind. So be respectful, develop a relationship. Remember, the woman is able to determine her own destiny, not you. So telling her what to do is probably not going to be helpful. Helping her determine what to do together might be more helpful. Remember that it's not just centered on the pregnancy. It can be also centered on the woman and how her health is, because she's important as well. It can be harm reduction. It doesn't have to be abstinence, because harm reduction would be better than drinking a whole lot. So we need to go where the woman is at. We need to be aware that some women are drinking because they've had a lot of trauma in their past, and how do we support them with that so that they can cut back or stop drinking. We need to be promoting health. It needs to be culturally safe, so depending on what the culture is and being aware of her culture and how can we make that safe for her. We need to be supportive of mothering. So if we know someone's using alcohol in pregnancy, we still need to support their right to be a mother and how that might look. And it's also important to use a disability lens when you're chatting with women. Most people with FASD are not diagnosed, and other neurodevelopmental issues as well. And we need to work with those women differently. And again, if you've worked in programs for a time, you realize that just intuitively. So level 3, this is the third level. And so we've moved out of level 2, which is more of a preconception focus. This is on specialized support for pregnant women with alcohol and social concerns. So you basically would ensure that women and partners at risk of alcohol or substance use are connected to supportive services. So addiction, support, mental health, housing, all the stuff we just mentioned. Make sure that if they're struggling with substance use, we're addressing some of those other issues so then they can tackle the alcohol or substance use. Provide the key messages to all pregnant women and their partners, regardless of whether you think that they're drinking or not. Be prepared to take a harm reduction approach, and include the women's support network if possible, because they have a huge influence. And sometimes our programs aren't set up well that way, and maybe we need to rethink the way some of our programs are set up if we had the resources. So what's your role? Help women to access the services, have the brief conversations, ask and advise women multiple times regarding alcohol use throughout their pregnancy, not just once. Encourage all women to abstain from alcohol use. If they're unable to stop, encourage her to drink less and praise her for that. Be non-judgmental, be gentle, discuss the effects on the baby, acknowledge that many pregnancies are unplanned, so probably more than 11% of babies will be exposed to alcohol in pregnancy, and emphasize that you can't change your past, but you can do a lot about controlling your future and the things that they can do from now on, and supporting her to do that. So what strategies do reduce? Again, referrals, include her partner. Support does not have to just be addiction. It can be many different things that will lead her on a road to better health for her and her baby. So if she's not willing to talk about addiction, talk about the other things that are causing stress in her life. Sometimes your role may be harm reduction. We do know that alcohol and probably crystal meth are the substances that cause the most permanent harm to the developing baby. And the other thing that I think is crucially important is to thank her for sharing and encourage her to come back and talk again. She may have shared something she's never shared with anyone else, or at least a health or social service provider. So I think you've been done a real honor if she shares with you. Level 4 is after the baby is born, and basically helping the baby to develop as best we can, and helping the mom for a future pregnancy and for her own health after the baby. Ensure that the baby's being followed if there's been any alcohol or substance use initially at birth with alcohol, unless it's severe alcohol use. We wouldn't see any effects of the alcohol use at birth, so it's important that that baby be followed, assessed, lots of stimulation being provided. Ensure that the mom has supportive parenting services that work for her. Support the new mom to remain alcohol-free if she's been able to do that. Discuss the effects of alcohol use on breastfeeding. And then, again, ensure the mom is using reliable birth control again, so that she doesn't have an unplanned pregnancy. So I'm going to talk very briefly about supportive alcohol policy. This is sometimes something that CAPC CPNP programs don't see themselves in, but everybody has a part to play in policy and at least advocate for. So policies that affect the alcohol use in your community and distribution would be alcohol policy. So it's a benefit, we know, to all sectors of society, not just women, not just pregnant women, especially if it's relevant to those who drink in an unsafe manner. And it's effective in reducing the overall harm from alcohol in our communities, in our provinces, and in our country, which can reduce FASD, but also how much we spend on alcohol use in our country, and the incidence of chronic disease and motor vehicle accidents and all of that as well. So in a nutshell, I could go on about these forever, but here are some of the things that we know from research that can affect alcohol use in our communities and distribution. One is regulating the physical availability of alcohol. So Ontario used to only have it available at LCBO. Now it's sold in grocery stores, and there's some people wanting to sell it in convenience stores. We know that if it's physically more available, the people will drink more. And so we need to be active and be ensuring that our voice is heard, that we I don't think we're going to go backwards and not have it sold in grocery stores, but we can hopefully prevent it from being sold in convenience stores. Affordability. So if alcohol doesn't keep pace with the price of inflation, then alcohol is more affordable than it used to be. And so that's why there's taxes and other price controls. So we know if it costs more, we'll see less use in our communities. So that's pretty simple. But again, we're trying to work with our country making money on alcohol and trying to decrease the incidence of chronic disease and things like FASD. So that's kind of a balancing act, but I'm on the side of health, so I'm promoting that we make it less affordable. Placing restrictions on marketing can be huge, and alcohol in the last 15 to 20 years has been marketed very heavily to women, and as a result, we see more women drinking and more women drinking at risky levels. So restrictions on marketing similar to tobacco would really be helpful, really, for any substances, including cannabis as well. Developing drinking and driving prevention and deterrence, so you can't drink and drive, all of the laws and policy around that, and we've seen how effective those can be. Modifying the drinking context, so only being able to drink in certain places, and as you know, we can drink in parks and at the back of cars now, so that's changing the drinking context. And the legal drinking age, so in Ontario we're at 19, some other provinces are 18. We want to keep it at 19 in Ontario because we know that can affect how many people drink and how many people drink at a risky level. Develop education and persuasion strategies, such as in Ontario we have a Sandy's Law, which is the requirement that all places that sell alcohol have to post a poster that talks about the risk of drinking in pregnancy. We're trying to get it changed to be a bit more, the wording be a bit more friendly, but we do have that law, and that's a great thing. Other provinces, I'm hoping, can do the same. And providing treatment and early intervention services as well can really help reduce the stigma around it and provide services early before there's a huge problem. So in summary, the purpose of our project is to help you begin a discussion about alcohol and birth control. It fits under level 2. And again, I strongly encourage you to take the time, go over it with all the staff in your program. And effective action needs to be in all levels of prevention, including supportive alcohol policy. And here's some of the services. Again, I'm not going to go over too many of them. The healthcare provider, key messages with prenatal education program at Best Start, Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, regular addiction services. Connects is a provincial service, and anybody can access those: pregnancy, preconception, so on. Some women may want to go outside their region for a treatment because they don't want people to know. Pregnancy services, again, their healthcare provider, their midwife, addiction services, Connects, Healthy Babies, Healthy Children are all across Ontario, and their home visiting services, they're wonderful. Good thing for pregnancy and for postpartum. Family and Children's Services, even though many clients don't like them, they can provide a lot of help as well and put in some extra supports. Canadian prenatal nutrition programs, I'm a huge fan of, and housing supports and help with social determinants of health. And then postpartum, again, many of the services are similar, except once the mother has had her baby, we would consider her preconception again, and also services around stimulating and with the baby if there's been some alcohol substance use. Oh, and there's some more. I was wondering if they're missing, but they're here as well. So infant and child development services, pediatricians, children's treatment centers, CAPC programs, all the things. They're very similar depending whether you're preconception, pregnancy, or postpartum. Just some are more specific to that time period in a woman's life. So that's it for the program. Wondered if anybody had any comments or questions, or even can help us with how to distribute the resources to the programs.
Oh my goodness, Mary, what an amazing overview you've provided. Yeah, if you do have questions or comments, please feel free to type them into the chat box there. We'll keep an eye on it. And I just want to say, I mean, it really struck me again how much folks who work in CAPC and CPNP projects are in a really great position to have these conversations and to share this information that you're encouraging us to do. I think we have a lot of great trust built with participants who come, and also being in a position to maybe make those connections that you were talking about.
Well, if you think about it, Sydney, women will see the people in their CAPC CPNP programs way more than they'll see their healthcare provider.
Right.
And so you have a unique opportunity to build that relationship, which can go a long way.
Mm-hmm. And what really stuck out to me as well was your advice, or what you're suggesting around just being open to putting this information out there with all women. And I can see how that's really valuable on a couple levels that you pointed out. I mean, not all women who drink may necessarily disclose for a variety of reasons. And I was also thinking that kind of having that more universal approach hopefully might do that bit in reducing stigma, sort of normalizing these conversations of, and I love the question that you were saying, like what role does alcohol play in your life? It's just, something that is, just making it more of just a more common question, something that we're open to discussing.
I should have put my email in here, and I'm sorry I didn't. I worked on this with some other members of our group, so tried to make it generic. But if anybody wanted to share anything, my email is mary.mueller, Mueller, @simpatico.ca. And you're welcome to send some suggestions or comments or questions. More than happy to chat with people. It keeps my brain going, and helps to keep you grounded to what's actually happening in the communities.
Mary, I can put your email in the chat box.
That'd be awesome.
We also do have a question here. How much impact does alcohol in the male partner have on the baby?
That's a very good question. So we know it doesn't cause FASD. So sometimes you'll see some false information, and I think we need to ensure we're sticking with the evidence. But we do know that alcohol for men can reduce the number of sperm, it can change the shape of sperm, and it can change the motility of sperm. And therefore, if the sperm is changing, we would assume it can perhaps change their fertility, or even perhaps the makeup of the baby. So epigenetics is something we keep looking at, and I think we need to keep looking at that research. I think it's developing, and but the males' alcohol can affect the sperm, we know for sure, and the males drinking can affect the females drinking.
Awesome.
It's a good question.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we're getting close to wrapping up here, but Mary, if I were to ask you, or I will ask you, what would you say is your sort of top tip for engagement with women around the subject? What would you say that is?
I would say do it with all women, and keep practicing, and tell women you have that discussion with all of them, so that they don't feel like you're labeling them. And I just found I just got better at it because I was able to learn from the women who were in front of me. And sometimes I even ask them afterwards, how did that feel? Like, what would you suggest I do differently? Because I want to talk with women. I want them to be aware. I want them to be able to reach out for support. But I want to make sure I'm doing it in a way that women can hear it and not feel judged. And
I love that. I think offering that vulnerability helps to build that trust back and forth. If you're willing to sort of put it out there that you're, being vulnerable, you know, you welcome that back. So that's beautiful.
And I wanted to comment on your thought around women not sharing. I remember we had women, you know, 3 and 4 times coming in a pregnancy, and it wasn't until their 3rd pregnancy that they were sharing.
Right.
So
right.
You never, the power of relationship builds. And so you can keep building on that, whether it's 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th pregnancy, whatever.
Wonderful. And we have such wonderful opportunity in that, in our CAPC and CPNP projects.
For sure you do.
Yeah.
And just a gem that not everybody knows about, that I keep saying we need to build these programs more as a community model, and have other programs partner with them. I think they're just in such a unique position with more at-risk women. The other women who are not struggling with social determinants of health, we need different strategies, but CAPC CPNP will work more with those struggling with social determinants of health. So they're in a very unique position.
Well, Mary, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today and to share your wisdom and insight and experience with us. I've really enjoyed and feel like I've learned a lot, and I'm sure our participants have as well. I would also like to thank those who joined us live for this Lunch and Learn webinar. It was great to have you here, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day and a wonderful weekend. But before you go, I just would like to put a plug for our next Lunch and Learn webinar, which is coming up on Friday, October 11th. And it is called Hope, Help, and Healing, a review of a suicide prevention tool from the First Nations Health Authority. And so that's sure to be another wonderful opportunity to learn and grow. And if you'd like information on how to register, just contact me, and certainly watch the network newsletters that will have all the information that you will need to take part. So I think that is our time together this morning. And again, I wish you all a wonderful rest of the day and a great weekend coming up. So
thank you, everyone.
Have a good day.